Here the thermostat housing is all nicely cleaned up. This is the serpentine or fan belt pulley tensioner. That's all been cleaned up now, so that's ready to fit. On the side of the engine where the oil filter goes, instead of the oil filter going there, they take it out through to pipes and they put the oil filter in a more convenient place up on one of the risers. However, what does happen is these connection pipes tend to get rusty and start to pit, as you can see. So all that pitting around there all has to be cleaned up from time to time, which I've done this time, and then it gets painted to protect it for the future. There the oil pipes are all cleaned up and drying, but they're in nice condition now. This is a brand new fuel pump. It's a sealed unit, inline, sits at the front right hand side of the motor. Nothing really to do with that. It's sealed and brand new, so just replace it back on as the way it came off. Okay, so time to fit the oil housing that takes the oil through to the filter. Okay, what normally happens is that actually sits up here on top of the exhaust, but that's the hoses that have just been fitted, and that is right at the back of the engine, so that's done. Now fitting the water pump, these gaskets have been pre-siliconed onto the surfaces and stuck on this side. The other side, on the engine side, these surfaces here where the water goes in have been greased, so therefore it makes it easy enough next time it's removed that the gaskets are still on the water pump and easy to inspect. So line that up and just a matter of putting the other bolts in and tightening it up. Now we fit the starter. Starter's already got its bolts in place like that. That bolts up from underneath. Most starters bolt fore and aft on the engine. GM have got it so it is bolting straight up from underneath. So I just tighten that up like that with the hand by holding up the weight with my fingers. Then a 1/2 inch or 13 socket, and that actually bolts to the engine block, not the bell housing. There's that one, and then there's the one right in there at the back on the block, and that's it. Starter's done. Fitting the oil pressure switch and gauge, that has got a Teflon tape on it. Swing that around and tighten that up. It doesn't have to be super tight. And then that's the pressure gauge, same thing. That goes into there. Teflon, some Teflon tape on it. Now the oil pressure gauges are in place. Time to fit the fan belt tensioner. I've already put the bolt in and tighten it up. I will tighten it properly when I've got the placement correctly for the rest of the parts. This is just a preliminary dry fit with the cylinder head onto the block, just to make sure the holes line up and make sure everything's alright. So the cylinder head actually hasn't got a gasket underneath it, it's just sitting on masking tape at the moment to protect the surfaces. But there's places like here that has to have a plug removed from the old cylinder head and put back in. There's the old plug there, and then there's all these studs that need to go into the into here, and that's what holds the rockers on. So you'll see that there, those rockers that we have there on the old head, well, they have to come up to here and they get cleaned up and fitted. So even after you've removed the nuts from the top here and taken the rocker out, we want that stud, okay, for the new cylinder heads. But you put that down on there, they are fine thread. This is a fancy snap-on pipe wrench, but you could put a normal ring wrench or ring spanner on there first, and then tighten that up so that it's really nice and tight. That's cleaned up quite tight, but still, when I pull full force on that, it's still not removing the stud. It's it's at about 3 minutes of heat. So far, even with the cast iron starting to melt, it's still not coming out. Right, on the tappets bolts that go in the cylinder head, there is 7/16 thread, but there's only 3/16 thread that actually holds the tappets down, and that's the old stud that is press fit. Now we don't have that type, so in actual fact we need that on this thread. So to do that, I have to make a precise tool that actually lines it up. There's a pre-prepared piece of thread bar inside there, and it has to be covered so that the threads don't get any weld splatter. And then here's a cut and prepared stud that fits inside of here and sits on that land to make sure it's perfectly straight, and that lines up that, and that is where the welding takes place, and it has to be perfectly center and V'd off so you get a full strength of the bolt. Although it doesn't take that much strength, you don't want any weaknesses anywhere. This is now welded, put together, and it's busy cooling off, so perfect success. Here we are, one specialized stud with 2 different threads, 1 down and 15 still to make. By the way, that is a stainless steel weld because it has nickel in it, and it helps adhere better, and you don't get the typical fatigue that you would normally get from welding with normal mild steel. So that's much stronger. Okay, so we've had a two-day delay almost, having to make these special studs that are for the holding the tappets down. Basically, the tappets work like this. This has to fit perfectly over here and slide up and down. Okay, so that sizing is quite important. It's all welded with a 1.5mm electrode. It was done with an electrode as opposed to TIG welding, to make sure that there's proper penetration in that V, and it was layer welding as it was turned around. So it's perfectly straight, and there's no weak spot there. This 316L rod has a fair amount of nickel in it, so it has malleability, so it's extremely unlikely to snap. In fact, it's probably stronger than the original metal. So this goes onto here like this, that goes onto there like that, and then that nut is what goes down to adjust the tappets. And there is hydraulic valve lifters, but basically that is to hold the thing into place. So there we are, got 16 of them. Normally, if I wasn't a little bit pressurized with time, I would order that part from the United States, from Summit Racing, but unfortunately the delivery time to Spain just takes too long, so I've just made them, and they've all come out perfect. They're exactly 57 millimeters long, give or take half a millimeter, but that's about it. I've used the old part of the thread at the top, and that is the new 7/16 thread bar at the bottom. That's it. There's no more you need to know about that, except for if you buy a cylinder head from Summit Racing, with all my experience and their experience, neither of us came up with this is required to put down your old tappets, and that's a job stopper unless you have those parts. Okay, now it's time to fit the studs that I've just made, and the first thing I do is put me on just a little drop of Loctite down near the bottom of that thread. There we go, a little bit of Loctite. Put that in, because really we don't want those things falling out. So I turn that in and tighten it up. Okay, now the lock nut at the top is turning and the stud is bottomed out. To make sure it's there properly, put the second nut on the top, and I give it just a little bit more, and then I undo it. Now I can undo the nuts without the studs coming out. That's perfect. That's it. Job's done. Then it's ready to put the next one in until all 16 are in, 8 per cylinder head, and the head then can go onto the engine block. Here's all the studs in place, and I'm proud to say that they're all exactly the same level. When I put the straight edge over it, maybe a half a millimeter difference, but that's absolutely perfect. So before fitting the cylinder head to the engine, obviously you take the tape off of all the holes, make sure the holes that need to be blocked up are blocked up, like the water jacket down there, or a pipe fitted, whatever you have in your case. And have a look here carefully. If you have a look, you'll see little bits of metal in that over here. So like all new parts, what they do is they still have a little bit of swarf in them, so good to give it a good blowout with an airline before it goes anywhere near that engine. I do like to make sure that the gasket fits the right way round. By the way, that side with all metal on the gasket normally goes down onto the cylinders, and this side normally goes up, and if it's carefully seen, it's got up written actually on this gasket, but quite often they're not written there. So up refers to up if you're looking down at the engine, which means it goes on that way. So it's always good to make sure that the holes are all right, and nice practice to compare it to the old gasket as well, to see if any holes are bigger or smaller, and understanding the reason why it might be that way.